Hello, and welcome to our presentation of Preserving Archives from the Physical versus Digital World, an examination of roles and issues. We are the Bibliophiles. Rachel Columban, Jake Dion, Delaney O'Shea, Marina Payne, Haley Shear, and Marta Zoltowski. I'm Marina, and I'll be starting the presentation, beginning with an introduction. A large part of an archivist's job concerns the preservation of materials. For most of history, this has meant dealing with physical objects, books, and other paper manuscripts. Since the advent of the Internet, this has expanded to include digital media. We were interested in how archivists deal with the preservation of physical information as opposed to the preservation of digital information. First, we will discuss how this issue relates to the information life cycle. Then, we will discuss the importance of the physical-digital divide to its information environment, that is, archives. Finally, we will go over some of the current issues facing archivists that are tasked with the preservation of information. So, how does the preservation of physical and digital materials relate to the information life cycle? An information professional's job concerns all 10 steps of the information life cycle. However, when we are specifically discussing the preservation of physical and digital materials, there are a couple stages of this cycle that are critical. The first is dissemination, or the distribution of information. The ultimate goal of an archive is to make their information available to their users, and the ways in which this is done will vary depending on the format of the material. While physical objects require the user to actually come into the space to access the information, digital objects can be accessed outside the archive itself. This means that the archivist must be concerned with their users' access to information in at least 2 different ways. An important step of the information life cycle that is relevant here is, of course, the preservation step. The first aspect of preservation concerns artifacts or physical information packages, such as books, journals, and manuscripts. When dealing with physical media, an archivist will want to preserve the object by keeping it as close to its original form as possible, while at the same time making sure the content of the object remains intact. The second aspect is the preservation of the content or ideas. While this is important to physical information, digital-born information also comes into play here. Because natively digital information does not have a physical form, the preservation of the content is the most important consideration for the archivist. The third aspect of preservation is the context of the work, specifically the meaning at the time of its writing or production. Context is interesting because it requires the archivist to preserve facets beyond the information object itself. In order for users to appreciate their physical or digital information, there must always be some way to preserve the context in which it was originally created and displayed. The information environment we are focusing on is archives, and the question of how to effectively preserve physical and digital information makes up a huge portion of the operation of this environment. When it comes to preserving information, the traditional roles of archivists include collection management and record keeping. A collection manager arranges and describes the records and archives, assuming the role described by Vasilikaki and Maniaru Papakonstantinou in 2017 as mediator between past, present, and future. These archivists usually decide what the information to be preserved is, and how and where it should be stored. A record keeper works with the information itself, helping to ensure open access to records, which is critical for society. In contrast, the role of digital archivist is one that is relatively new. The role of these professionals is to manage born digital information. While many of the techniques used for digital archiving are similar to those used for physical archiving, it must be noted that archives as a whole have struggled to adapt to the changing landscape of information. Meyer in 2012 and Noonan and Shute in 2014 advised professionals to start developing policies for managing, curating, and preserving institutional records, as well as the significant role archivists could assume in the process. One of the central tenets of archiving has been regardless of format, speaking to the necessity of preserving information that comes in any package, but archivists in the past could not have imagined the wealth of formats we have available today. Digital information is the future, so digital archivists have had to overcome these issues in order to ensure access to this information. Now I'll hand it off to Jake to continue with the major current issues faced by information professionals.
Hi, I'm Jake, here to discuss some of the issues facing archivists when it comes to the preservation of material. Some of these issues are only a factor when dealing with physical information, some only affect digital information, and some must be taken into consideration when dealing with both types of information. When it comes to physical preservation of archived objects, there is the risk of physical damage. Over time, archived material may become so fragile that accessing objects directly could cause damage. One way archives try to mitigate this is through digitization, so that they may be accessed online by both professionals and the general public. It is important that anyone directly handling archived material be properly trained, for improper handling can lead to damage during the digitization process. Aside from just the damage of wear and tear, physical materials are at risk to be damaged by pests, dust, and mold. Storing items incorrectly may lead to these kinds of problems. Mitra and Banerjee give a few common ways that archivists use to combat these problems. Some archivists treat collections with substances like naphthalene to keep away pests. Archivists regularly remove dust and keep the archives cool and dry to prevent mold from growing. When dealing with preservation of digital material, information professionals face a myriad of issues, and not all of them digital. Digital preservation in an archive can meet the same pitfalls that plague physical preservation, but also face their own issues. One is obsolescence. As technology has advanced, formats for information storing have become obsolete almost as quickly as they have been invented. In an article from 2010, Dougherty reported that there were already some issues accessing material that had been created as recently as 2007. This type of obsolete material can be as simple as a file type that is no longer able to be opened on modern computers, or as complex as a format that needs its own specialized equipment to access it. Another issue with digital file storage is corruption. If even a small amount of data becomes corrupted, it is possible that the entire file is lost. Backing up files can help, but if the metadata becomes corrupted, it is possible that all access to the information will be lost. Finally, digital materials are subject to copyright law in a different way than physical materials are. If it is found that archived material is infringing on copyright laws in some way, it is possible that this material could be deleted from the collection for legal reasons. As previously mentioned, both physical and digital archives share similar issues when it comes to preservation. Natural disasters like earthquakes, fires, and floods can strike unexpectedly and damage or destroy archived materials. Just think about the famous fire at the Library of Alexandria. This can be avoided by keeping both physical and digital backup copies stored at another location or in the cloud. If a digital information object only exists in one specific computer, the information object is at a greater risk of loss. Another problem is lack of storage space. Physical archives need plenty of room to safely store information objects. Digital archives can store a much larger amount of information, but still have a finite amount of space. Not everything can be kept. Archivists need to make tough decisions in their collection by reviewing the value of their items and determining what should be kept and what should be discarded. Poor organization and neglect are another threat to physical archives. If a document exists in a collection but cannot be retrieved due to a messy organization system, it's as good as gone. If left unchecked, poor organization can take too much time and effort to remedy. The last item on this list is the financial cost of keeping archives up and running. Preservation equipment, materials, and training can be expensive. Smaller archives can have trouble affording the cost to preserve their collections, especially as the preserved archives get older and either become more fragile or require updating to newer formats to avoid obsolescence. Information preservation needs to be an ongoing program, not a project. It is not enough to have multiple backups of digital files, and it is not enough to just catalog and store an item. Preservation requires upkeep, updating, training, and collaboration to succeed in protecting archived materials. Institutional change never comes easy, and shifting focus put on physical material to digital material will always be a challenge to the old guard. As staff move in and out of institutions, overarching focus can shift wildly. Budget constraints, especially in smaller libraries, can also pose a threat to digital preservation. When it comes time to tighten the belt, expending valuable resources on innovative changes can be seen as an unnecessary risk. All of these factors compound into change fatigue. With so much upheaval and uncertainty, an institution can fall into a rut and simply lose its mojo when it comes to the challenge of digital preservation. Another institutional problem that archives face in preserving information is a simple lack of training. Technology is constantly evolving. An archival program can be made obsolete in the time it takes to master it. Preferred file types and storage configurations can change in an instant. Keeping up with technology through proper training can often exceed budgetary constraints. Perhaps the biggest institutional issue in digital preservation is the willingness to commit to it. Reinhardt describes it as a lack of engagement, where librarians feel they have the responsibility for digital preservation, but not the authority to actually do it. This kind of helplessness is part of change fatigue, but roots in the leadership of an institution. As long as libraries view digital preservation as a project to be completed and not a program to maintain, digital preservation archives will languish and rot, not because the staff doesn't care or know how to fix it, but because no one told them to take care of it. Thankfully, these issues have been known to the archival community for years. In his 2007 article, Bailey makes the observation that archivists have been lagging behind in the field of digital preservation, noting that other professionals, like IT staff, librarians, archaeologists, and scientists, have been ahead of the curve. Bailey cautions that in order to stay relevant to today's technological world, archivists must adapt to digital information. Now, 13 years later, we do see that archives have embraced the new information landscape. The ephemeral nature of digital information is a double-edged sword. It all at once makes it extraordinarily accessible and extraordinarily easy to lose. While archivists have been working with physical materials for as long as the profession has existed, digital materials have only exploded into existence within the recent past. Although this means that many of the issues of preserving information in a digital archive are unique to that context, there are also issues that are shared with the archiving of physical information. While digital information and the preservation thereof are becoming an increasingly large part of the profession, the preservation of physical information remains essential for archivists. These issues, though they affect every individual archivist, need to be addressed on an institutional level for lasting change to occur. Finally, and most importantly, the role of archives in preserving information, both physical and digital, is essential to society, as well as to individual users of each archive. Without preservation, valuable information would continually be lost and become inaccessible to those who wish to access it. Thank you for watching the Bibliophiles presentation of Preserving Archives from the Physical versus Digital World, an examination of roles and issues. We are Rachel Colombon, Delaney O'Shea, Marina Payne, Haley Shear, Marta Zoltowski, and me, Jake Dion. Thank you for listening, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your semester.